Or
You should be able to log on to the state guest network if you can't get the legislative one. Okay, so we're recording, so you're good to start things off.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Vermont Milk Commission, April 3rd. We're scheduled to meet today from 1 to 3:30. We have a pretty robust agenda. Good afternoon, Anson Tebbets with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, and I think probably we'll begin with introductions. And why don't we start with folks that are joining us online. Kirsten, go ahead.
Thanks, Anson. Good afternoon. I'm Kirsten Bourgeois. I'm Director of Industry Affairs and Marketing for Dairy Farmers of America.
Harold Horrigan, representing DFA, a DFA corporate board in the Northeast Council, dairy farm in Fairfield with an extended family operation and pretty heavy into the maple right now.
Thank you. Alan, why don't you begin in the room here?
Sure, Alan Reeks. I sit in the consumer's chair with an interest in retail and selling milk products.
Nicole Foster, Vermont Cheese Council. I make cheese. Whitney Hull, dairy specialist for UVM Extension.
State Rep John O'Brien. I represent Windsor Orange 1, which is Royalton and Tunbridge, and I sit on the House Committee on Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry. So I'm in the House.
And Laura Ginsberg, I'm off camera at the moment. I'm the Dairy Strategy and Innovation Manager for the state and taking notes and facilitating presentations today.
And a couple more guests online. Hi, John. Good to see you.
I'm representing Vermont Farm Bureau. Oh, me or John Cleary?
There's two Johns.
Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, John Franklin. Go ahead.
John Franklin from Guilford, first Vice President of Vermont Farm Bureau, a dairy farmer. We also have some beef and maple.
And John Cleary. Give you to John.
Sorry, it's me. John Cleary, Regional Manager for Organic Valley. Thank you.
Catherine.
Good afternoon, everyone. Catherine Durand with Agrimark.
And Jeremy, nice to see you there. Welcome.
Thanks, Anson. Jeremy Rousseau, part of the milk team with Stonyfield.
Okay, there may be others that join us throughout the afternoon, but let's get right to it. So I think our first item on the agenda is to get an economic outlook and forecast, and Catherine Durand with Agrimark, the Vice President of Economics and Legislative Affairs. So Catherine, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. Do you all mind if I pull up a few slides just to guide the conversation a little bit?
That'd be great.
Okay, bear with me as I do that.
Looks good on this side.
It does. Okay, great. All right, wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you for having me join you today. Always a nice time to get in front of this group and look forward to the conversations that we have. Just as a warning, I have a little bit of school off background noise going on today. So if you hear some disruptions, well, that's Good Friday and having young children. So if I could get this to, let's see, here we go. So I wanted to start out today and maybe just say, if we think oftentimes, at least when I'm thinking about individual farms and the situation here in the Northeast and looking at milk prices as I do, it's very easy to get deep in the weeds and sometimes focus on the negatives. And so I don't want to discount the challenges that our farms have and what the milk price forecast looks like. We'll certainly get into that. I can't help but talk about the challenges. But I do think it's also important to just level set a little bit and encourage ourselves to zoom out a bit And when we think about, some of the broader macro trends going on in the dairy industry, there's actually quite a bit to be excited about, both in terms of consumer demand and really just investment in terms of the industry. So I wanted to make sure we at least started out on a positive note. So the first thing I would mention is just point your attention to, many of you have probably seen a version of this picture on the left. This comes from our friends at IDFA and National Milk, who have put together just a map of the investment in dairy processing in the last couple of years. This says there's been 10 billion. I think that number is close to 11.5 billion at this point in time. But when you look at this map, it really tells you that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity that the industry sees. The vast majority of milk in this, or excuse me, processing in this country is owned by cooperatives. And so that tells you that there's also optimism from the farmer owner perspective. Additionally, if you look at this map, you'll notice that there are 3 main categories: cheese and whey, butter and milk, and fluid milk plants. And surprisingly, it's a pretty diverse colored map. So I look at this and I think that there is just a tremendous amount of excitement for our industry here in the United States. I think as we continue to play more on the export market, there's just a lot of excitement about how the U.S. is positioned in terms of the efficiencies of our farms and of our processing plants to meet that global demand, likely more than our competitors can. So on the plus side, I think there's great opportunities. As we'll get into in my final remarks, there are certainly some risks that come with that in terms of playing in global markets. Geopolitics are certainly, we'll talk about that. But I do think if we take some of the noise out in dairy markets, there is a lot of positivity that I just think is important to recognize. So what you can see here on the right-hand side of my screen, shifting gears a little bit, wanted to just call out where we're at in terms of milk production growth. First and foremost, I would say in the Northeast, we have close to about $3 billion of investment in dairy manufacturing coming on in the next couple of years. And so what we're seeing is that there is a pull for milk. And so our farms are rising to meet that occasion. In USDA's latest milk production report from February, it showed that milk production here in the Northeast was up 1.1%. You can see that the majority of that came from the addition of cows and just slight increases in terms of yield. If you want to focus in on Vermont, you can see that Vermont's production in February was up 0.5%. They added 1,000 cows and yields were slightly down. So it should not be a surprise that most of the new processing capacity in the Northeast is coming from New York. And of course, if you zoom to those New York production numbers, you can see that's where most of the production gains are increasing. So I think that this is a great opportunity for the Northeast and for Vermont farmers to have a much different milk environment in our milk shed. Not too long ago, we were in quite an oversupplied situation, and it's nice to be on the other side of that. The other thing I wanted to mention, going down to the bottom right table that I have, is I just pulled, just for reference, these are Federal Order 1, which is, the Northeast milk market. These are our utilization rates. So these represent the percentage of milk in the order going to different class plants. Class 1, as a reminder, is fluid milk products. Class 2 is cultured products. Class 3, hard cheeses and whey products. And Class 4, butter and non-fat. What you will notice, you can see some trends that I think this group probably is aware of already, but I'll just walk through those quickly. First and foremost, you will notice that in the last 10 years, Class 1 utilization has gone from 34% down to 28%. That should not be surprising with the trends that we've seen in fluid milk consumption, but You compare that with increases in consumption of our class 2 and 3 products, as well as class 4. So note that class 2 here in the Northeast went from 24 to 27%. Class 3 went from 23 to 30%. And then class 4 has decreased. So there's kind of two things going on that I think you should be aware of. One is consumer trends and manufacturing trends driving this, particularly in the class 1, 2, and 3 space. Class 4, those are typically our balancing plants where we make butter and non-fat dry milk. So that 14%, I would say, is the decline in class 4 is partially being offset by increased utilization in class 2 and class 3, but also is a reflection of what I mentioned before, how milk production is much more tight these days. So we're seeing milk gets favored in the class 1, 2, and 3 space and not in the class 4 space. Okay, a little bit of a delay here. So I wanted to just talk about our 4 main dairy pricing commodities briefly, just to get a sense. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but before I show you what my outlook is in terms of milk prices, I wanted to just give you a sense of where our pricing commodities are, because as you know, the federal order blend prices all start with these 4 commodity prices. And through a series of federal order equations, whatever the commodity price is, that translates into the component prices we pay our farmers, the class prices we charge our plants, and then ultimately how we pool milk and share those revenues here in the Northeast. So I think how I would phrase the 4 markets right now, I'm going to talk about them in terms of least exciting to most exciting. And let me be clear, when I say exciting, I'm not talking exciting in terms of the highest price. I'm talking exciting in terms of the amount of movement we've seen in the markets these days. So I'm not including too many statistics or key points here. I'll probably talk through those. What I've done visually in this slide is really pick one graphic or visual that I think tells the story of each of these commodities. So let's start with least exciting. Least exciting has been on the cheese and the dry whey space. In the last month, we have seen that cheese prices have essentially remained flat. CME spot prices this week, a couple of days ago, traded at $1.68. So cheese really is, for those of you that watch the markets, there's not too much to report in terms of how cheese has changed. Similarly, dry whey prices in the last month gained about 6 cents, but the underlying fundamentals are very similar. So we haven't seen too much change there. So I'm going to leave it there because they're less exciting, but I will point to the number 1 picture I think describes each of these. When it comes to cheese, I want you to look at the bottom left graph here. And I realize that is really hard to see. This is a screenshot I pulled. But what it is a graph looking at 2019 until 2026. And it's looking at the volume of US cheese exports. And so when I think about the cheese market, what I want you to think about and understand is that we have seen a tremendous change starting in about 2022 until now in what our demand for cheese looks like. Cheese used to be very domestic driven, which kept the cheese price fairly stable. Domestic demand doesn't change too much. Domestic supply doesn't change too much. So prices were more steady back before 2022. But since then, we have seen, I showed you that graphic in the first slide of all the investment we've seen, and you would have noticed a lot was in cheese. And so that investment in cheese has really put the US into a position where we need to find a home for it. And our domestic demand is not growing fast enough to keep up with the production that we have. So we have 2 choices. Do we hold it in inventory or do we sell it abroad? And we've made the decision as a US industry to sell that cheese abroad, and you can see that tremendous growth. So again, my point here is just to say that we are reliant upon the export market for cheese now the same way we were with some of our dry products a few years ago. And so what this does in my mind to the cheese market is make it much more susceptible to global impacts. Okay. So that's where I'm at with cheese. Let's go to a little bit more excitement where we've seen some movement in terms of the class 4 prices in the last month. Butter prices, we'll start there. Butter prices came down 15 cents in the last month. And so what I think is most important about butter these days, first of all, we have quite a bit of butter, and that's driven by milk components and high butter fat in our producers' milk. But what we've been able to do is export our way out of this oversupply of butter fat. And so if you look at the bottom graph, I think this is the story that tells it all for butter. What I want you to notice kind of two things. The first is if you look at this July, I hope you can see my mouse here. Starting in the second half of last year, well, maybe I should go back a little bit further. What you'll first note is that our US butter price, which is the blue price, and then I'll just point to the red price is New Zealand. Typically, our global dairy partners, we're going to always kind of trade at the same price rate. Sometimes we see a divergence, and what you'll know is that we saw a divergence really starting in about 2024, and this would have been when we started to see those farm components really creep up. And so what the US butter price did was come down. Now it came down and gave us a significant discount compared to our global butter competitors in the EU and New Zealand. And what that has done is put the US in a position where we've been able to export triple-digit growth in butter since that time period. So our position on the global market is really driving that. Hold that thought. Second thing I want to say is if you look at halfway through 2025, you'll notice that the European price, the red price, the Europeans going into last year, we had every expectation, we being market analysts, that the European milk production was not going to grow last year. It was anticipated that it would be flat at best. They were going through some structural issues as well as some animal health issues. And so there was no expectation that European milk European milk production was going to go very high, except that that did not pan out. And so towards the end of the summer, we saw that the EU came on incredibly strong with their milk production, and that drove their prices into the tank very rapidly. So that's that red bar you'll notice goes down pretty steep. Well, we, the US, at the same time, we have all this butter fat and butter we need to move. If we're going to be successful in moving it, we need to maintain that discount to the global price. And we had no choice but to bring our prices down to maintain that competitive advantage. And so that was when the US price started to fall significantly. All right, so we have, when we get to the forecast, you will note that I think we have hit rock bottom. And if you look at this US butter price here, you'll notice that it has started to come up. And you'll see, you know, what I think is one of the challenges, yes, we have the New Zealand price going up, but notice how close the European price and the US price are coming. Now, that might be fine. We might just be getting into the time period and kind of going back to history where we are pretty close to the Europeans. That could be the case. Or it could be the case that because we continue to have a lot of butter fat in the US market, that we need to see a correction in our US price in order to keep that product flowing. Last but not least, I do want to mention when it comes to butter, we also are exporting a tremendous amount of butter into the Middle East and North Africa right now. That, of course, is having some challenges with the war in Iran. The Strait of Hormuz being shut is completely disrupting global dairy supply chains right now. It has the opportunity to get worse depending on how this conflict unfolds. So that's another thing that I look at and I see as quite a bit of risk when it comes to the butter market. Okay. Last but not least, let's look at non-fat. Non-fat gained about 15 cents this last month. What I want to say about non-fat is if you look at the supply of non-fat, things look great. So this graphic here, I'm showing you is just non-fat inventories over the last 3 years. And you'll note that we are far below where we were last year in 2025 and just hovering above 2024 levels. As I mentioned before, with all this investment in dairy processing, milk is not going into those balancing plants. And so we just have not a lot of non-fat being made, and our inventories are down about 28%. So the price is looking incredibly strong. This week, non-fat traded at $1.94. You'll see on the screen here, I have $1.58. That's the average price I'm anticipating for this month. But things look really, really good when it comes to non-fat. The one call out I would make is that we are not very competitive globally on non-fat prices, but I think we'll be able to sustain that for a time. I just think at some point in the next couple of months, we will see a correction and non-fat prices will probably come down. Okay. The one I did not mention here, the last picture, is Dry Whey. And this is my silly AI created picture of Catherine's protein latte. Yes, I am a sucker for protein like the rest of the world is right now. No, I don't drink iced coffee though. So that's how you know it's AI generated. But protein is driving the whey markets completely. So that's giving a lot of support to the class 3 price. Okay, so hopefully all of that gives you a sense of the forecast numbers. So if you're looking at the graphic, this is blend prices from January of 2023 and then forecasted until June of 2027. So this peak here, this is February of 2026. As I mentioned, I do believe that we have hit rock bottom. I think that we are getting into a much better place, getting into that $22 range as we get closer to the second half of this year. And for the farmers in the room that care about the component prices, I've noted those on the screen. One thing I think is different in the market these days as compared to years past is you'll note that protein prices, which are driven by cheese and dry whey, those are at a premium to butter fat prices, which was not the case for several years before that. So that's one big difference in the market that I think is important. But ultimately, we are looking at a 2026 average blend price of announced at Boston at $20.37. So this is my last slide. All to just say that I do think that we've passed the worst of it. I am optimistic that markets look like they are in better condition, but it's optimism with an asterisk. I mentioned the war in Iran having impacts in terms of potential disruptions in the butter market. But depending on how this all unfolds, the impacts could be quite dramatic and widespread. Graph on the left, of course, is looking at crude oil prices, which have gone from about $60 up to almost $120, $110 here. So this has the opportunity to impact both cost of production, cost of manufacturing, cost of transportation, and that all ultimately flows to the consumer, which could have an impact in terms of global demand and dairy demand. So I am not an expert in global conflict. So I am certainly not making a prediction on how this may unfold, but it is something that I think is a bit of a black cloud overhanging the dairy market. So with that, I did start on a good note, but I did end on a bad note. But all in all, there are always challenges in the dairy market that we always overcome, and long term, we are very well positioned for this industry to continue into the future. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Catherine. First, open up to any of the commission members who have questions. John?
Catherine, on the 10 billion in investment in the dairy industry processing, it's pretty easy to see right off that there are none in New England. So I was wondering more, are the spots where they're going, is it because there a lot of farms in those places, or is it more investment or markets are closer to those places?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. I think it's a combination of a lot of things. So and this is just my opinion on it. Of course, none of them are our investments, so I don't want to speak specifically to it. But my understanding and expectations is one of those factors would be production. Great. I think New York is, I should know this, I think it's the fourth largest dairy producing state at this point in time. I should totally know that. But plenty of farms, plenty of milk, plenty of opportunity for additional milk in New York. The other thing I would mention is that the state of New York has made a tremendous amount of investments and supported those plants and those businesses coming into the state. So if I had to point to two major factors, those would be it. And I think the latter one is really critical in driving a lot of that.
Those would be with Chobani and Fairlife, right? Those are the two major ones that have announced their expansions, right?
Chobani and Fairlife, Great Lakes Cheese, Burn Dairy, I know upstate, that there's quite a bit across the region.
Catherine, you mentioned overseas. Where are those markets? Where is U.S. dairy going, and where's the growth?
I think the growth is widespread. And what I'm excited about for our growth opportunities is that there's really not one market that we're looking at. And I think that diversity in market makes me feel a lot more comfortable about the prospects of global demand in the future. Right now, our top export partners are Mexico, Canada, China. Those represent the vast majority. But the Middle East, North Africa is another one, Central America. You kind of name it, we have our products there. So it's really dependent on product. As I mentioned some of those, you can see though that each of those have some red flags on them. Canada and Mexico as an example, we're going to have to renegotiate the USMCA. I think we'll be successful on that, but that's something that's going to be really important to maintain those markets. We've already talked about the Middle East, North Africa. And of course, China is another one that we have trade challenges with. China, I think we also need to be cautious of how their economy will be impacted by the conflict in Iran. They are going to be very susceptible. They're very reliant on energy coming out of the Middle East, which could very well impact their economy and their ability to purchase products. So that probably gives you a little bit of a taste of the story, which is the diversity of our outlets is incredibly beneficial for U.S. dairy, but it does almost makes it more complicated as well.
Any more questions for Catherine?
Alan. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Alan Reeds. Just some quick points of clarification. Earlier in your remarks, you said, we're doing things that our competitors can't. So are those competitors, say, Canada and Mexico? And I'll ask just a couple of quick questions. You mentioned export volatility, but also we're exporting our way out of a challenge with cheese. Do you think that represents also a two-edged sword? Because then with that reliance on exporting our way out with cheese, we're now relying and ramping up for a market that could turn very suddenly. Is that what you were referring to with respect to volatility? And then, of course, the competitors question.
Yes. So let me answer the competitor piece first. So what I meant by that is I think about the main dairy producers globally. We've got the US, we have New Zealand, Oceania, and then we have the European Union. We, compared to those two, have the advantage of land, we have the advantage of scale. I think how the US dairy industry has positioned itself in terms of things like sustainability efforts, net zero efficiencies, things along those lines. Our approach has been a little different than some of in the EU and New Zealand as an example. And so I think that's going to position our farms and the broader industry better into the future. Let me just give the counter to that. Looking at the European Union, I mean, they have a tremendous amount of milk production, and not to say they don't have opportunities, but the way their farms are structured, are a little different than ours. They have some challenges in terms of some of their environmental policies and things along those lines that it's my understanding may challenge their ability to grow. So that's what I meant by the US being well positioned to compete in the global market moving forward. So now let me get to your question, Alan, on what I was alluding to with the kind of the pros and cons of being in the export market. And you're spot on with how you were interpreting my comments. So we have more in cheese, as an example. We have more cheese than we can consume here domestically. So great. We have partners we can get it to outside of the US to keep that product flowing. Long term, if we took the long-term view of that, that is going to be positive for US dairy. But because those are global partners that are subject to disruptions from whatever the topic is of the day, yes, there could be very short-term volatility that could happen very quickly. I mean, this Strait of Hormuz is a prime example of that. A trade disruption, you kind of name it, that volatility is going to now impact our market here at home, and our farms feel it. And that's, one of the challenges that I think the farm community always wrestles with, is that we're farms in small towns, right? But we're reliant upon commodity markets that fluctuate dramatically with the export market now. So it's a double-edged sword. Maybe you said it that way. But I think from the long-term view, it is a good thing that we are doing this. There was one more point I wanted to make with that. And this goes back to when I was talking about the butter price, I showed that graph of how our price compared to the Europeans and New Zealand. And what I said when it came to butter was, in this case, or right now, we are able to keep moving that butter and keep getting it overseas by having the lowest price. And so the other part of that double-edged sword of being in the export market is that unless we can establish ourselves and in some way as a premium product, if we're playing on the global commodity markets, we are either going to have to be priced at the global price or better in order to keep that product flowing. And so if you were to look back historically, and I haven't done this recently, but I'm willing to bet if you were to go back 10 years ago with cheese, the US cheese price was not going to move the way the global cheese price was. It didn't need to, because it was a domestic product. That's not the case anymore. And so that can become challenging when, you're a farmer sitting in Vermont and, you're living in your small town and you see what you see, but you're being impacted by everything so broad. So double-edged sword, I think, is a great way to think of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One more question here for John.
Yeah, just to expand on Alan's question, Catherine. So from the farmer point of view, when you look at exports, the worldwide exports, the price has to stay low. So I assume the farmer's not getting a real premium for that. But then on the input side, with what's happening, say with the war of tariffs, you've got inputs that are going to go through the roof this year. So I just wondered from the processor point of view, and also whether things like dairy margin coverage, would help at all with that, just because I can see those two inputs and what you're going to get for your milk going in different directions.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that, John. that was a big miss in my report out here that I may have alluded to a little bit, but I really didn't talk about it. I did mention crude oil prices going up, but I more so was talking about it in terms of overall cost and demand impacts and all of that. But that is a huge topic I'm glad you brought up. The cost of production on our farms is going to be tremendously impacted this year due to the energy prices, the fertilizer prices, like you just mentioned. So yes, farmers are not insulated from global markets on on the milk price side or on the input side of things. And so there's things that farmers can do. And you mentioned the DMC program. DMC is is a good program. It has its limitations though. First and foremost, the DMC program is only, in my opinion, works well for farms that are 6 million pounds or below. Not to say that someone that's say 10 million pounds can't utilize it, but they really should only be protecting the first 6 million pounds because that's the threshold where financially the program makes sense. So that's one big downside. If you're larger than that 6 million pounds, anything above that, you really need to look for other opportunities to protect, to manage your risk. And we can talk about that in a second, but let me just go back to one other downside of, or limitation, I should say, of the DMC program. The DMC program is based on a margin of milk price and feed price. Now that makes sense. Your revenue source and your number one input price. So it's imperfect though in today's world where yes, feed prices are going to be impacted by fertilizer cost, by energy cost. So not to say the feed markets are going to be insulated from some of these issues in terms of fertilizer disruptions and all of that, but there's no mechanism in the DMC program to specifically pick up on a farmer's direct cost increasing in fertilizer categories or anything else like that. So it's not a perfect program. It's good to have, but it has its limitations. On the milk price side, I would also say anything above that 6 million pounds, there's other opportunities to manage risk. One of the best programs, in my opinion, that I think farmers are utilizing at an increasing rate is what's called the Dairy Revenue Protection Program, or DRP. This is another USDA product, risk management product. It's unlike the DMC program, which you elect coverage once a year. It is very simple to make a decision. DRP, you kind of have to go in a little bit more frequently, and your opportunities to manage risk are dependent on the markets at that point in time. But it is a good program, and it is partially, the premiums associated with that are partially subsidized by the US government. So that's another opportunity that I think farms can utilize. That's just on the milk side of things. There's no feed price side of things. But USDA has a host of other risk management tools that farmers can use. This past summer, there were some programs, I'm going to forget the acronyms right now with the pressure on me, but where you can lock into prices for day-old calves, for beef cows. There's other opportunities out there as well. On the inputs, I know that some farmers have certainly will lock into fertilizer prices and other input prices in advance. So, some people are probably a little insulated from the challenges that we're dealing with now, but others are not going to. So there's opportunities out there, but all of them have their limitations.
Well, thank you, Catherine. We appreciate all your knowledge and your report, and appreciate you jumping on the line here to give us a little global perspective of what's happening and what it means to Vermont. So thank you very much. I think we'll move on now, and I think on the agenda now we're going to move on to the organic world. Both Adam and John are with us, and they have a hey Adam, hey John. So we'll leave it up to you. You've got a little presentation that you want to share with us. I think Laura's going to help you work through the slides. So here we go.
All right. John, maybe I'll drive the boat a little bit first and then hand it over to you if that's all right.
Yep.
First of all, thanks for inviting us to join. Really appreciate it. And I did have an opportunity to connect with a couple of you at the Northeast Organic Dairy Business Innovation Center Summit that was in New York here recently, and what a great event that was too. And Catherine, always a professional and spot on dairy economics, so appreciate her remarks there. We're going to drill down a little bit more on just sort of the organic experience recently and today. And I just did these numbers and I was kind of quizzing John about it. I said, well, my numbers show that Vermont's got about 140 dairies. And if I look at the numbers, about 140 of them are organic. So about 30% of your dairy farms are organic in the state of Vermont, which sort of surprised me. And when I looked at it, but maybe if you just flip to the next slide, Laura, what we're going to just run through is sort of that right there, the organic dairy by the numbers. I'll do a little bit about organic dairy market findings and trends, because I was just at a trade show where some data was out about natural and organic dairy, plus the Organic Trade Association just released their organic market report, which gives you a little bit of more understandings of what does organic dairy look like. And I think what you're going to come away with is organic right now is in a strong position. And we're feeling pretty upbeat, and that's across the industry, but also as one participant in the marketplace, Organic Valley, we feel that way too. I'll reflect a little bit on market dynamics. And much of what Catherine said is similar for organic dairy, but some of it is dramatically different. So I just want to point that out, because all of you in the state are thinking about dairy, and organic has some unique challenges and unique opportunities too. And then John's really going to say, hey, here's the sentiments I'm hearing on the ground. He's out there every day talking to farmers across the entire region. So if you just jump to the organic by the numbers, this will tell you a little bit about what does organic look like right now in the US, and then also in the Northeast and in Vermont. This is always hard to do, but we try to pull data from a couple of places. I feel like the most comprehensive data in terms of number of farms is from the Organic Integrity Database. These are people that hold organic certificates, and you can sort those certificates for dairy. And so this tells us a little bit what's that dairy look like world. And I have my team try to do this on a somewhat regular basis. Then you have the NAS data, which many of you have seen, right? And that comes out is published on like about a 5-year kind of cycle, and sometimes it's updated in between that cycle. But if you look at the numbers, it shows that there's about 2,826 organic dairy farms in the US. Now, if you look at just the Northeast, about 46% of those are anchored in the Northeast. And if you look at just Vermont, I just did that numbers, about 140 of them are in Vermont. Now, since 2021, which was just right after COVID, there was about 168 farms. So you did see a decline. But I saw other states with bigger declines. So it's just something to acknowledge. If you look at kind of volumes, I'm not going to speak too much about that, but like Texas, California, New York, those are your 1, 2, 3s on volumes of organic milk. If you look on number of farms, you're looking at like New York, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So if you think about farms and livelihoods, that 2021, you see a big drop in farms nationwide. About 415 organic dairies left the marketplace. And if you all remember, in Vermont, a lot of that had to do with international trade disputes that created feed costs and went through the roof. We got organic soybeans, if you remember, that were $40 a bushel, right? So, and pay prices had not kept up with that. So there was some relief dollars, and I know the state of Vermont also brought some support to organic dairy farmers, but at the national level, there was about $50 million that went out to try to stem that pain, and didn't stem enough of it. And so we did see some losses. Now we've seen a little bit of growth in organic dairy in a number of farms. And I'll talk about that in a minute, just because it relates to the organic dairy marketplace. Maybe next slide, Laura. I was at, there's a huge trade show in California called Expo West, and I was just at that. And there's lots to take from this slide, but really the thing I wanted people to note on this slide is if you look at those two axes, one is percentage of growth opportunity going up on the y-axis, and then on the x-axis you have sort of its opportunity for growth in terms of dollars. And what I just noticed here was, like, when you talk about dairy, and this is for like A2, grass-fed, organic, eco-label dairy, sort of all of that, it sits in sort of a high right means you have high opportunity for growth and you have high opportunity for revenue. And that was just like a baseline thing that I took away from it. I thought I should take a snapshot of this because it proves some of the experience that we're seeing in the organic space. If you go to the next slide, this is the organic space that I mentioned. The trade association just issued their organic report last month, and I pulled out the organic dairy piece, and there's a couple of slides here that I'll point to. But overall, organic, if you look at like 2015, organic was about a $44 billion industry. Today, it's $76.6 billion, and about 6.8% growth year over year. Now, that's about twice the rate of growth to a comparable industry that's non-organic in grocery, and these are in sales. So I'll just acknowledge that. But if you look at the subcategory there, and I pulled it out, is in milk and cream and eggs and yogurt and cheese and butter and cottage cheese and cream, you see growth rates there that are really impressive. And if you look at just dairy, and I pulled eggs out, and I've done that before, dairy's up about 10.5% overall. You have some areas like yogurt, but that's got double-digit growth, right? And dairy overall, in terms of its, you see a 9.5 there, but if you pull eggs out, you're at about a $7.5 billion segment of the industry. The other thing I just note is that all of organic dairy is about 13% of all of organic sort of experience. So pretty impressive. And what I saw overall within the organic space is that animal proteins are hot. They're, whether that's, and you can see it on the right-hand side there with the meat, but also on the dairy side, it's hot as well. So animal proteins and products show a lot of promise there. And a lot of us could speculate why that might be. You have GLP-1s hitting the marketplace, you have the MAHA movement, you have the change in the food pyramid, you have protein craze. I think people that are wanting to seek premium dairy are just, this is where they're landing with their dollars. And if you flip to the next slide, it just shows you a little bit about, I know Catherine talked a little bit about what's the makeup of the different commodities. And this is not quite that, but it's not far away from that, right? This is the product lines. But milk and cream is about 60%. And then you have yogurt at 25%. And then those other two kind of equal balance off as the rest. So this just creates a dynamic, which is interesting in terms of how do things like the federal market orders impact organic, or what's our trade agenda at the international space. And I think most of you probably know this, but if you flip to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about sort of how we same and how we're different. But most of organic dairy in general is a domestic market, right? And in fact, probably one of the only places I see you would see exports is sometimes, or imports is sometimes infant formula space. So largely organics is pretty domestically orientated. So right now, I know the conventional market's been challenged a little bit with some pricing, but organic pricing is up, and it's very competitive in the farm economy. And John can speak to what that's been like in Vermont, but prices are up. As I mentioned, the utilization is different, where if you have 50 to 6% in class 1, it just is a different dynamic than what we see perhaps in conventional. So that creates a disconnect with the federal market orders of pricing. And if some of you are tracking that, there is an effort underway. There are companies like ours, along with 3 others, that are filing an appeal to how those orders impact organic dairy, because we don't think it impacts us sort of in a fair manner. And then it's prohibiting the way that we can bring additional resources to farmers. The other thing I'll just acknowledge is that grass-fed dairy claims are up and growing. So it's like you have organic, and then we have in some parts of Vermont in the Northeast, we have dietary claims on top of organic, and those grass-fed dietary claims are very strong and growing for our businesses as well as the industry at large. These are, I think, mentioned before, but protein and product innovation is strong. I'm going to show a slide. We have a new product out that really emphasizes that. It's called Protein Plus. I'll put those two together. Dairy buyers and partners are advancing partnership programs. So like I've been hearing a number of the partnerships for climate smart commodity programs have been now advancing markets for producers. Those have finally come through. So dollars are sort of going out and that way to support producers that want to do things on farm. These two other ones, one I thought was very specific. Labor is a persistent challenge on dairy farms. Finding sufficient labor for sure is continuing to be a challenge, as well as farm transitions. And those are not a surprise to anybody on this in this call. And then the last one is just a more specific one to manufacturers is, a lot of states are now coming forward with extended producer responsibility, which has to do with how do you manage your packaging. And there's different states have different rules. So we have like a co-op like ours that markets into all 50 states. We have a rule in Colorado that's different than in Oregon. That's different than what California is going to do. That's different than what California will do. And it's just it's going to become crushing, and it's going to take more and more time to try to navigate that space. Actually, Maine's coming on shortly as well. So with that, that's sort of a overview of what the organic marketplace is looking like, and I'm more than happy to share other slides on what Organic Trade Association has provided. So I can send those along as well. But I'll turn it over to John just to give a little bit of insights into our experience in Vermont and in the region as someone who's there every day.
Yeah, thanks. So it's true, demand is strong. And, for Organic Valley, that really has to do a lot with our brand right now. Brand growth is double-digit growth. And Vermont and New England and the Northeast in general continues to be a great place for us to add more milk, close to the big populations, good processing, particularly in New York State. The last 2 years have been pretty good in terms of pricing. 2026 is the best year we've had in quite a while. And we're starting to see that really help farmers along. In terms of milk growth, the drought last year in Vermont, I think, limited milk growth in the state. Our farmers basically got through the year, they squeaked through on feed volumes. Now coming into the spring, as we see feed availability increase along with the strong milk price, I think we're going to see milk volumes increase as well, which we welcome. So we're seeing some growth from milk from our current members, as well as new farms coming into the market. So I'm working with members that are conventional farms that are going through, this 1-year transition to get their cows into organic, and also startup operations. I'll note, as you see there, HP Hood closing. We all are aware of that. We sent our last loads in there over the last couple weeks. That was the HTST plant. A lot of that fluid volume will now move into UHT plants. Also, you'll see a slide at the end that shows our new ultra filtered product that Adam mentioned, the Protein Plus. Fairlife has really dominated that ultra filtered category. And so we are the first one to launch a national branded ultra filtered milk. Just like Greek yogurt, it takes a lot of milk. It almost doubles 2 gallons to get 1 gallon of ultra filtered milk. That's being processed in New York, which, Vermont is part of the milk shed for that processing plant. So that's part of our growth here. The grass-fed dairy, I'll mention, continues to grow. It meets consumer expectations. In Vermont, we're lucky that we have 2 100% grass-fed routes running. It's the kind of thing we want, these sort of diversified opportunities in a state like Vermont. So if you're a farmer that wants to farm that way, You can only do it if there's a truck route running in your state. So I'm glad we have that. Pricing is strong across the board, $40 plus. If you're a grass-fed Jersey farmer, you're getting $50. These are prices we've never seen in the 20 years I've been doing that. It's not easy to do. It's not the right fit for everyone, but it's nice to have some diverse markets that way. Now, at the end here about challenges, I'm seeing farmers retire as they get older with no one to take over the farm, just like the rest of the industry is. And the things that we can help to do to keep these farms going is before those cows leave, work with them on succession plans. DBIC with the farm modernization grants was really a wonderful thing. We have a lot of labor-intensive tie stalls or other facilities that need work. They're expensive to build facilities, but we do have farmers who are saying, hey, I want to grow. I've got several farmers in Vermont on our routes that are building new barns this year. That's very exciting, but everything's expensive. Same thing is true for startup costs. We have farmers saying, I'd like to milk cows in Vermont, but it's hard to afford real estate and startup facilities. One thing about startups, I'll mention just a lot of the growth across the country has come in terms of organic from Amish and Mennonite farmers. And that hasn't been a big sector in Vermont historically, but the Amish community in northern Vermont has been growing, building new barns, taking over some existing organic dairies. So that's a little bright spot there to see that new group of dairy farmers coming to Vermont. And, we still have land availability that's better than some states. So I expect that community there to grow as well. You could go on to the next slide there. So that Protein Plus in the center, that's the new ultra-filtered milk that we talked about. It's exciting to have that. Retailers are falling over themselves to carry it at this point because it's a new product. It's a category that there hasn't been an organic option for. So anyway, demand is strong in Vermont. We're glad to be here. And I think we're going to see good kind of stable market going forward. So we can take questions, or Adam, anything else you want to add?
Open up, James.
Nothing for me.
Questions?
I just had a question for you.
Sure.
Laura, are the slide decks gonna be available? So, okay.
They'll be
Yeah,
posted
because I know our
afterward.
committee was interested in.
Alan. Couple points of clarification, very helpful. Adam, these remarks go to your comments, just to make sure I understand the story behind the story. You mentioned the growth of organic in general. You gave some cross-category examples, such as eggs, but of course, dairy is at the heart of it. With 2025, are you, with that impressive growth, is how much is due to volume and how much is due to, say, pricing of eggs? So it wasn't merely inflation in some products, but in the case of eggs, it just went well above. So was the growth based a balance of consumption as well as spend? And then just a second point for John, you mentioned brand growth as a general statement. Is that new SKUs coming on, or are you getting more market share? So we'll go with the inflation versus consumption, and then the brand growth.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that was looked at by the Organic Trade Association. If you look at the overall organic marketplace, about 2/3 came from increased volume and throughput purchases. And then another third through price taking at retail, so inflationary. If you look at the kind of category of eggs and dairy, it was probably very similar, but I think it skews a little bit more. It was like 60-40 instead of 65 or 66-33. So
Very positive. Great.
Yep.
And regarding the brand, we're seeing branded growth on individual items, not just expanding the product offering. So, for example, our fluid milk growth of our brand has been in double digits recently. Organic is a little different than conventional in that a greater percentage of the organic milk is in fluid category. Sort of industrial categories or ingredient categories are smaller, though they do exist. cheese has been growing quite a bit, and as Agrimark has really led the way in this type of thing. As our cheese growth has increased, the markets for whey, organic whey, have really become significant.
Right.
That's relatively new, and finding good markets in that way.
Thank you. Kirsten?
Go ahead.
Yes, Hanson, I had a question on what's the retail price point of your Protein Plus milk as you launch that?
That's a good question. Should I look it up? I'll look it up right now on Amazon.
Okay,
And you may notice that's not a full half gallon.
okay,
Price point is tricky for premium products like this.
yeah,
Especially a product that's condensed. You're putting a lot of expensive organic milk into that product. So it's a less than half gallon size. I'm not quite sure the ounces. And the retail, Adam may find it, I believe it's somewhere around $6.50 for that that size.
yeah. Well, I'm glad to see you're going that way. The consumers are certainly looking for protein anywhere they can with a clean label. It's a pretty unique time in the marketplace to watch this.
Yeah, I'm showing it just between $5.99 and $6.99.
Yeah. Fairlife is like a 52 ounce bottle, also a little less than half a gallon.
Just a quick question on if someone is thinking about, either expanding their forward in organic space, or if it's a startup, what is the process for that if someone's considering that, the transition? And the other thing is, where are all the animals coming from? It must be really challenging to find the animals if you do want to expand or have a startup.
Yeah, organic cattle prices are quite high now. Anyone's interested, they can start by talking to, myself as a field person for Organic Valley, or to call NOFA directly. As people probably know, it's a 3-year transition on land, and it's a 1-year transition with animals. That 1 year can overlap with the land transition. I think the fact that such a high percentage of our farms are already organic, over 30%, that's part of why we're seeing less growth than, for example, New York and Pennsylvania. I think there's an opportunity for some of our larger conventional dairies to think about diversifying and starting an organic dairy as well. Many of them own several operations, maybe where they're raising heifers. I think I'd like to kind of spread that word that this is the kind of thing that, even though bigger farms may feel like they can't access this market because of the pasture requirement, there may be still some opportunity for them to start up a second operation or that type of thing. And then again, this thing about aging dairy farmers in Vermont, we're all seeing it. And how do we help younger folks get access to land and capital to keep some of these farms going before the cows leave is really important.
And a follow up on the cheese. Why hasn't organic cheese really taken off, or maybe it's about to? I don't know. I think people have dabbled in organic cheese, but it looks like your product line is not nationally. There's not that sort of push for organic cheese. Is it just too expensive to do?
I think there's oh, go ahead, John. I can add to it.
No.
I would
go.
Well, I just think that the strength of organic dairy has been around fluid traditionally, Anson, and that's where people have leaned in. I will say for Organic Valley right now, like our string cheese offerings are very popular, and we're seeking to grow those right now. I mean, we have distribution at Starbucks as an example. So, there's opportunity there. And if you talk to the people that are managing our cheese business, they'd say there's more than they can really fill right now. So they're hopeful in that regard.
And it's interesting how in some categories, consumers flip-flop back and forth between organic and non-organic, and some they don't. In fluid milk, consumers tend to, if they choose organic, they tend to stick with it. Categories such as yogurt and cheese, on a week-to-week basis, they tend to go back and forth between brands, between organic and non-organic.
Adam and John, you referenced this earlier, but going back to inputs now for organic dairy, I know in our committee, we've talked about how the drought last summer in Vermont and somewhat in the Northeast, without some sort of special provisions for our organic dairy farmers getting their hay, from neighbors who are not organic, they had to start accessing hay in, Ohio, even for Colorado. So it wouldn't take very long for your strong organic dairy milk prices to be wiped out by that sort of, importing of forages from 2,000 miles away. And then this summer, if we've got, organic dairy farmers are still using diesel. So is there a sense, of not panic, but just concern on the dairy farmer front?
Yeah, there could be. Farmers are feeling pretty good just simply because milk price is just like greases the wheels for everything, even when other things are difficult. So the strong milk price has really helped farmers feel good to survive through even a tight feed year. One thing I'll say is that grazing cows doesn't use any diesel. Putting up stored feed certainly does. But there is a certain sort of natural efficiency to this organic model that does help. It's a lower input approach. I do feel like there is a lot of hayland in Vermont as total cow numbers have come down across the state. I feel like there's more hayland that could become certified organic. And I think that's something that we might want to encourage to get more organic forage available locally so that when feed is tight, our dairy farmers can buy it locally. So I think what I'm saying is there's not necessarily a shortage of land and feed. It's just a lot of it wasn't certified organic, and that could help. I didn't fully answer your question there. Weather and fuel can always be a challenge, but we'll have to wait and see.
Harold, go ahead.
Yes, a couple comments. I guess I would observe that organic and conventional farmers share a lot of the same challenges with input costs and drought and access to feed, labor, high land prices, aging dairy farm owners. That's across the board with all dairy. And I have always believed we're in this together. I think it's kind of unique right now that there's opportunity to ship milk and grow organically or conventionally, when 4 years ago there was no opportunity for growth in either category. So that lends itself to some pretty robust marketing and changing consumer dynamics. I guess I have a question on your sales side. Do you track as alternate beverages have kind of seen their heyday and their sales have been declining for 2.5 years pretty aggressively? Do you see some of your increase in sales coming from that consumer, or do you track them that way?
I can speak a little bit to that, and I'm sure John will comment it. That does seem to be a trend that's happened. I would acknowledge that. Organic Val, we actually also offer an alternative creamer that is non-dairy. So we try to capture them on both sides of that space, because we have producers that grow, this is an oat product, that grow oats in Minnesota and Wisconsin that bring that into an oat beverage. I would say overall that trend line is consistent across all of the marketplace. And so I don't know that we would say we track it any more than anyone else does, other than we're trying to be offered, those complements of beverages across the board.
Yeah, well, many of your conventional processors and co-ops have done the same thing to get that consumer, whether they're partially dairy or no dairy or whatever.
I mean, I have 2 teenagers that live in my house, and they want both of those products in the refrigerator, whether I want them there or not.
Right. Yeah.
John, you have a question, John Franklin?
I did. I was just, well, I was gonna comment on the question about how farmers are feeling in the Organic Valley Co-op, and as one of them, I'm scared as hell. As long as this year goes well, I think I'll be all right, but it's still pretty tight. We faced a lot of the same issues as conventional, and even the price, we've got a big space of not as doing as well that we've got to dig out of. I don't think I'm alone in that, but I know that that's my perspective on it.
Thank you, John. Okay, well, thank you for the updates. We appreciate it. And we've got some follow-ups on both topics here, both from Catherine and both from Adam and John. So you're free to stay on. If you've got other business you need to do, feel free to do that. I know it's a pretty busy time for everybody. So if people need to jump off, that's fine. But now we're going to move on to, we just came off the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center, had a nice conference in Albany. Some forward-thinking thoughts there, some follow-ups, and Laura Ginsberg, who runs the Center for the Northeast, has just got an update on some of the outcomes of that conference. So, Laura.
Great, thanks. So this is part of the slide deck that I used at the summit to talk about impacts. I've added some specific Vermont information on a number of slides. Okay, so the Dairy Innovation Center, just as a reminder, it's one of 4 in the nation established as part of the 2018 Farm Bill. And we've received funds through congressional appropriation on an annual cycle since then. So we have received to date $52.7 million over 7 rounds of funding that run concurrently and that we're managing separately. We serve 11 states, Maryland and Pennsylvania in the south, up to Maine. And the real goal from the USDA's perspective is pretty generalized, but to support dairy businesses in the development, production, marketing, and distribution of dairy products. These are the other centers. The Northeast Center is the only one of the 4 that is at an agency of agriculture. The other 3 are at universities. So the Center for Dairy Research manages the Dairy Business Alliance up in the Midwest. California State University at Fresno and Cal Poly run the Pacific Coast Coalition. And then the University of Tennessee runs the Southeast Dairy Business Innovation Initiative. And we all do separate programming. Each of the centers has their own prerogatives and things that they prioritize, and they have different approaches to the funding. So each of us does something a little bit different. I will say the primary difference for the Northeast Center over the other 3 is that we don't have a processing lab that we invest in. So the other 3 have used a portion of their funds to invest in their own processing facilities.
Yeah, just a couple. What about the states with nobody? Texas, Idaho, big dairy states. Yeah.
They don't have any representation at the moment. So when the centers in the 2018 Farm Bill, the USDA had to put out a competitive process. We applied along with a number of other organizations. There was, I think, 15 to 18 total applications to do different regional representations. Each center got to define their own region. We were selected for the Northeast. And I don't know if there were any applicants for the Rocky Mountain states or Texas, but you are right, there are some in Idaho, there's some major gaps there. California actually was not one of the first centers to be awarded. So there was no representation on the west, west of the Rockies, and certainly not much west of the Mississippi. And then there was a bit of outcry. And so California was added when we received our 3rd round of funding. And they have consistently received less money. That's a USDA decision to award. The 3 primary centers are all required to receive the same amount, and California gets about a 1/3 of what we receive.
It's not on a per farm, per cow production. at
No,
all?
we each
Okay.
receive the same amount except for California. So we do three primary things with our money. We do competitive grants for dairy businesses. We do directed grants for projects that have a regional, multi-state or national benefit. And then we do contracts for research to help us answer questions about the sector that help us make better investments. I'm going to run through a couple of maps and then show some results. And then I have project specific information kind of depending on where we're at for time and particular follow-up questions. So for applications, we have received as a program, 1,384 total applications requesting over $117 million. In Vermont, we've received 375 of those applications requesting $29 million. For context, Vermont and New York are very close. New York has requested just over $32 million, I believe. Pennsylvania is around 17 million, so there is a quite a spread there. The lowest state request that we have has come from Rhode Island, I believe, or it might be Delaware. My notes, I can't see my notes at the same time, so I apologize for not being exactly sure on that one, but it's either Rhode Island or Delaware. And their request is under $1 million. So we have a huge spread in our region of both dairy production states, with New York being the 5th largest in the nation, Rhode Island being the 48th in the nation, and then also the organic, so the diversity of processors and producers here. Vermont and Maine are the highest number of organic farms as a proportion of total farms, both roughly around 25% to 30%, depending on the year. That is not how the rest of the nation looks. And Vermont also has the highest number of farmstead and raw milk cheesemakers of any state in the nation. So there's a lot of unique variation when you think about this region as compared to the other regions.
The colors on Maine and Massachusetts, it's hard for me to tell if that's the 8 to 12 million or not.
That is where they are at.
Okay, thank you.
We have awarded 488 projects with $40.5 million in funds from those original applications. That's a 35% award rate overall, with an average grant of $83,000. Those grants have leveraged just over $20 million, and our grant range is pretty large, from $10,000 up to $1 million. In Vermont, we've awarded 162 projects totaling $13.4 million. That's a little bit higher than average award rate. And our average grant is a little bit lower at $82,000. And those grants have leveraged $3.8 million. I will just note that for every application that we receive, it's reviewed by 3 people. And so when you think about all of those applications that have come in being reviewed by 3 people, it's been a lot of reviews, and we see a lot of, we can see sort of behind the curtain of what's going on in dairy through the application process, which gives us a unique perspective on how we invest our funds. This map shows our awards to businesses, thinking back to the first way that we invest money. So you can see, again, New York, Pennsylvania, and Vermont have the highest dollars figure for awards directly to businesses. And then the next would be Maine, and then New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and then the remaining states are less than $2 million. And then each of these dots on the map represent one grant project. The colors represent a different grant program. And I think it's really illustrative to see where dairy happens in this region, and also the variety of projects that are happening across every single state that we represent. I love seeing that one farm way up in Maine. That's an Organic Valley farm. They got a milk handling and storage grant. And then all the way down to almost in the boundaries of Washington, D.C., we have a farm that processes all of her own milk and sells at green markets in Washington, D.C. So quite a diversity, again, of projects.
Or typically, where do the leverage dollars come from?
A lot of time it comes from labor for the project, or it would come from either traditional financing or capital that they have on hand. So we see a lot of people with lines of credit that are using that to.
Like a match almost like.
Right.
Okay.
It is a match, in many ways. A lot of times it allows our investment as a grant allows the project to happen because for larger processors or larger farms, for example, it buys down enough of the cost of the project to make it feasible.
And sometimes federal or state money too.
Right. Sometimes we do have some projects that have received the Regional Food System Infrastructure grants. We've got a couple of projects in Vermont that have received working lands dollars, a number of projects that have received value-added producer grants. And they can't match federal to federal for the same thing, which is a requirement of USDA, but we have one farm in particular that I'm thinking of that received a value-added producer grant for doing a portion of the process that we were not funding as a cheesemaker. And so we were able to use those dollars to help them complete a much larger project. Then we have awards to universities and awards for technical assistance. We funded a number of universities across the region. This is a really important investment strategy for us, both in workforce, but also in reaching the farm community. And the technical assistance awards, you can see, interestingly, most of those have gone to New York, Vermont, and Maine, which is a different mix of the total award states. Maine has worked very closely with New Hampshire and Vermont Extension and has created the Tri-State Dairy Exchange, which is Whitney can talk more about if that's of interest. And it has been a really successful multi-state model for delivering dairy technical assistance across the region at reduced costs for each of those individual extensions, and allows some really interesting programming to happen. And then we have some other programs happening through nonprofit organizations. So not all of the technical assistance awards happen through universities. They happen through organizations like the Center for Dairy Excellence in Pennsylvania, or it could be Berkshire Ag Ventures as an example in Massachusetts.
Did Minor, for example, get some ever?
They have not applied.
Wow.
The Minor Institute. We funded Cornell University and Cornell Cooperative Extension. Also SUNY Cobleskill is a recent recipient. So we have different types of recipients. Generally, we do farm grants, processor grants, or grants that are open to processors and farms. You can see here the light blue is farm, the darker blue is processors, and then the light green is the processor and farms. Most of our funding in a special round that we received, which is the really high bar, was an appropriation just after COVID, when we worked with Secretary Bill Sack to make a recommendation for how USDA could better support dairy in this region after the exit of Horizon and Maple Hill and the canceling of contracts in a real crisis situation. And each of the centers at that point received an additional $19 million infusion of capital. The result of the report that we provided to Secretary Bill Sack was to say processing is the critical component of the region and it is super fragile, and we commit to investing a large majority of funds in that way. And that's what we did. Over $12 million went into processing grants out of that particular round. If you equalize the rounds, so each round we receive a different amount of money, you can see how that kind of flows and how it's equalized over the years to be almost half and half farm and processor focused dollars. Similar charts, this is our funding focus area. So like I said, we invest in a lot of different things, from workforce and technical assistance to farm and processor modernization to goat and sheep focus grants. The dark bars in all of these are modernization grants. So that would be modernization for farms or processors, which is the vast majority of how we use the money that we receive now and the vast majority of our investments to date. And then again, if you equalize, can see through this beautiful patchwork, all of the different ways that we have invested money. I will say in round two, so round one, we received $450,000. Round two, we received just over $6 million, and we didn't know going into this grant that we were going to receive that appropriation. And so in round two, we were trying to solve all of the problems, which is why you see so many colors. And we have learned since then to really consolidate and focus our approach to have better impacts. And so that's why you see fewer colors going through the more recent years.
Question?
Yeah.
With the funding of your center, does USDA within these categories, would they say, okay, modernization, but it can only be done in this particular, the plant that you currently have, or you can expand a plant, but you can't build a brand new plant, or would that be covered in another, category? So you've got elbow room.
Yeah, great question. So we cannot fund construction. We have supported a number of expansion projects. So if an applicant comes to us and says, I'm building a new plant, I need a grant to put equipment in it. That's where we fit in. We can do equipment, we can do supplies. If people need training on the new equipment, if they need new audits or certifications, we can pay for that. We cannot pay for any sort of construction. That's a very strict line. And actually, some of the expansions that Catherine was speaking to earlier are happening at some of our grantees, which is pretty exciting to be engaged in.
You could do research though, like cracker cut or environmental packaging, right, came out of these?
We can. We've done quite a lot of research focused grants, both for businesses and for our own research. So we've looked at distribution challenges. This study that's here on the table is about the opportunity to develop and support a regional value-added training center. We have supported grants that are more on the R&D side, so there's more risk to them around packaging innovation. So Cabot's 30% PCR packaging was a result of one of our grants. Stonyfield lightweighted their Yo Baby pouches as a result of one of our grants. We have a grant that's really exciting. It's underway right now with a farm called Oak Ridge in Connecticut. They are putting milk into aluminum cans. It's branded as Muzi. So we purchased the equipment for them to put the milk into the aluminum cans. And the focus of the next portion of that is Gen Z appeal and school market. So they're doing some additional work on low sugar flavored milk, particularly for schools in aluminum cans. So we do quite a lot in the R&D and research space in products and packaging. So I'll click through some funding outcomes. So of our completed projects, so we have many, many more projects underway. We have 166 fully completed projects, which is 34% of the total awards. Those 166 projects were awarded $8.2 million in grant funds. So again, just a small fraction of our total grants. Those grant projects reach nearly 500,000 people. That's either through social media or direct interaction or field days or farm workshops or training opportunities. In Vermont, we have 56 completed projects, which equals $3.1 million of grant funds. And those projects reached 5,000 people. So the first is the total, the second is pulled out Vermont numbers. This is the slide I get really excited about. So jobs and revenue of the completed grants, we have created over $10 million in new revenues, which is 123% ROI. At the summit, I made a joke about how you're not going to find that on the stock market, maybe unless you invest in like NVIDIA. But I think looking at that, seeing the new revenue, that does not include, in most cases, cost savings. That's new dollars being generated in terms of sales. We've maintained almost 1,700 jobs and created 109 new jobs. And then 14 new or beginning farmers started producing dairy as a result of grant funding. And the products that were supported as a result of these grants reached over 25,000 market outlets. Burn Dairy, you can see here, they were a grantee of ours in New York. We supported one of their aseptic packaging lines. And this is a product they make for school markets. In Vermont, we have created $1.5 million in new revenues. You'll notice that if you look back, Vermont, we awarded $3 million in grant funds. So our ROI in Vermont, I think, is interestingly a little bit different because we have funded a significant amount of technical assistance, which doesn't lead to direct revenue creation. So I would say that, for example, one of the things Whitney is here to talk about is the Dairy Herd Management Technical Assistance Program. We have been funding that for 4 or 5 years now. And so a big part of our money is going to technical assistance that's not otherwise being funded. Regardless, we've still generated over $1.5 million in new revenue, 249 jobs and 19 new jobs. 4 new or beginning farmers started producing dairy, and almost 17,000 market outlets have been reached. So I know I'm just about at time here to keep us on schedule. I'm happy to answer any questions. This slide deck will be available. So I do have slides, for example, on our processor modernization and some of our other projects that will be in this deck for review. For the folks on the phone, I passed out our regional impact report and a printed copy of the Value Added Dairy Training Center report that we just finished and presented at the summit. The other thing that you will receive, and that will be posted as part of the slide deck here, is day before yesterday, we presented an economic report on the impact of dairy in New England. And that looks at both state by state and cross boundary or regional impacts of dairy. So not only what the state level revenues are, but how it impacts the region, how income and revenues flow between rural and urban areas, where products go across the nation, and the value of different state-based investments. So all of that will come to you as part of the packet for after the meeting. But happy to take any questions.
Or just a quick synopsis, what do you think the outcomes of next summit? What are you going to be focusing?
So we have 2 grant rounds this year, and then based on funds that we have received from the USDA, one is on processor modernization and one is on farm modernization. No surprise based on the charts. And then we're really digging into this value added training center because workforce is such a critical issue across the region. And it is a really high need project for value added producers in the New England region. We're also going to be looking at new ways of leveraging our partnerships and regional structure so that we can support answering and working towards solutions for some of those harder problems like farm succession planning, technical assistance for farm succession, how to get new farmers onto existing farms. And then many of us, or many of the people at the summit were interested in finding ways to stay engaged in between summits and as dairy farmers and processors. And so the Dairy Innovation Center team will be starting webinar series that are topically focused as a way to further elevate our value to the region.
Go to the phone, Harold or Kristen.
Yeah, this time it's me. How do you define market outlets?
So that is a point of sale, and the USDA has a list that people have to reply to. So we get existing and new. We only count the new. So that could be a grocery store, it could be a farm stand, it could be a school or an institution. It could be a wholesale market or the broad other category. And then it's self-reported information.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Adam?
Also,
Oh, Harold, go ahead.
Sorry.
yeah, that's fine. Of the 7 universities that you funded for technical assistance or research, how much was that? And was that part of the 40 million that was handed out, or is that over and above?
That is part of the 40 million. I'd have to pull up exactly how much went to universities and I can get that to you. I don't have it right in front of me, but easily accessible.
Okay,
Adam?
Yeah, hey, thanks. I just want to acknowledge, right, the uniqueness of the Dairy Business Innovation Initiatives is the dollars land in these regional places, and then they scope the body of work in the need reflective of the region. So it's a really powerful model. And right now, if you think about farm policy, right, there's an effort to grow the Dairy Business Innovation Initiative in the Farm Bill. In that up to 30 million. Now, whether a farm bill will happen or not, I think we all can take bets on that. But I do think an appropriations bill will happen. And so there is an effort afoot to try to continue to resource the DBIs. And there's requests for 20 million that would be split across those centers. So if anybody's interested in that body of work, and especially in Vermont, your 2 centers have been strong supporters, but outside of Vermont, there's always a voice to be added to it. And you do have a lot of strength there in terms of a lot of members of Congress that could advocate for these type of resources that are meaningful. And I'm willing to be a resource if anybody wants more on that, because we do a lot of advocacy on this.
That's a good point, Adam. And I would just highlight, we don't need the farm bill. For a while, we were worried about the reauthorization of these centers would have to be included in the farm bill, but it's in statute, so it can't go away. The only real issue is the appropriation, which is the focus that we're on now. So we don't have to worry about the farm bill. What we need to worry about is making sure that they're funded at a level that meets the needs of the region. I think I've got that right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the president just released his budget today. We're sort of the president just came out with one, but Congress is moving down that road no matter what. Sometimes they ignore the president. Actually, most of the time, Congress ignores the president's budget, no matter who it is. So, that request around 20 million, hoping to get at least to the $17 million mark, I think would be really important to show progress on this programmatic front.
Just a quick observation that echoes a little bit of what Adam just said. And that is the multiplier effect. When you're talking about not only retained jobs and new farms started, everything that does for the supportive industries is harder to track. It could be a project in and of itself, but to me, that's certainly reflective of dollars well spent and results well documented.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we'll follow up with some more supplemental materials with you all. And at some point, the commission may want a letter in support of the appropriation that I've been thinking about. Maybe we can circulate that afterwards to tell Congress that we need to fund these things a little more, considering the need that's out there. And this is one of the joys of this, is that it's a grant, it's not another loan. And this is kind of important, and we're trying to build infrastructure at all scales and sizes. Maybe we'll follow up on that later. But we want to turn to a Vermont Dairy update. Whitney Hall is with us with UM Extension. Whitney, great to see you, and a dairy specialist with them. And we'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me. I don't have any slides today, so I thought this could sort of be a little bit more of an open conversation. So I just kind of want to give a really broad overview of Vermont Dairy as I see it as a technical assistance provider to Vermont dairy farms, and then kind of open it up for a little bit of conversation about, maybe some things that are unique to Vermont that are different from other New England states. So we've definitely, I don't think it's news to anybody, we've seen a huge decline in dairy farms across the state over the past 10 years. So I just have a stat that in 2016, we had 828 dairy farms in the state, and we are now under 430. I haven't gotten updated numbers from the state in a couple of months, which has felt like a little bit of a relief to not continue to see that number go down, but it's going to continue to go down this year, especially. I just want to give a correction about the number of organic farms in the state. We have 104 as of probably January. And again, I expect that number will also go down. We have seen a bit of a bright spot with some new organic farms coming online, some people transitioning. So maybe we won't see it go down, but the overall number of farms, I think, is definitely in decline. It's a huge point of concern. I was in Killington earlier this week at a annual water quality meeting, and the big topic in the room was we're losing farmland at quite an alarming rate and higher than predicted. Some of it's going into housing. There was a lot of discussion about Act 181, but I think the bigger conversation is, why are we losing farms, right? Like, why are dairy farms choosing to exit the business? And so I think it's a lot of things that people have already mentioned this morning. We have an aging population. The average age of a dairy farmer in Vermont is 58 years old. And we have a lot of deferred maintenance and infrastructure that is in critical need of repair, and farms that do not have money to make those upgrades. And so I think Laura could probably give you the exact number of the last dairy farm modernization grant, but I think it was over $10 million in asks with under $100 million of available funds, which shows you just how critical the need is, not just across the region, but I think Vermont saw a huge number of applicants apply. And obviously it's not for construction, but I review for DBIC grants. I've reviewed since I started with UVM, and I review for working lands. And I see that as like a really critical role of my job to understand what's going on out there. Like, what are farmers asking for funding? And this year we saw some organic farms asking for funds to help convert from a tie stall into a loose housing facility. I think I saw probably around 10, and that's just the ones I reviewed. So, we're seeing some industry standards changing, both with organic and conventional farms that are being consumer driven, and, farms needing to change the way that they're farming, but there's not always a funding source to do that. And even though organic price is good and conventional dairy has been good in the past, it's just that roller coaster ride, right? We're seeing input costs increasing. It's about to get pretty ugly, I think, for planting season, especially on the conventional side. So, our labor costs have gone up, everything has gone up. And compounding that with extreme weather events, we saw some organic farms exit the business in the past 6 months because of the drought. They weren't even able to get a first cut of hay. So, they're probably, I have some farms that tell me we have more hay land than we know what to do with. We actually can't get to it all. But there are areas of the state, Harold's in one of them, where they are fighting for land. So there is not a spare acre of land that farms in that area, and Addison County's not any different. Like, where the big dairies are, there is a shortage of land, and where there are fewer dairy farms, there is an excess of land. But it's not just as easy as saying, oh, well, let's just, farm the hay over here and we can export it. There are so many different factors to that. So, and sometimes that land has been critically neglected. It's in need of a huge infusion of resources to be able to get it to be productive again. So there's just so many compounding factors. And then, milk price for conventional farms is quite often below the cost of production. So it makes it really hard to be able to fund any projects or to make any upgrades or to change systems when you're just kind of trying to survive. And I think it's really great that we have a lot of grant programs, and there was conversation in Killington about, well, we have all of these great programs for Vermont farmers, and they all have a 4-letter acronym. But, we have a lot of programs that are designed to help farmers adopt a practice or, to support them financially, but they're not equitable. It requires a lot of time and a lot of, you have to know where to look. It's a lot of reporting requirements. I think anyone who has done a grazing plan for an FAP will tell you that it's not easy. So, the state has done a great job of providing those programs, but not every farm has equitable access to them. And I think that's something to think about. And there's been some talk today about farms in New York and the upgraded processing plants. But they have also had 3 rounds of funding funded by the legislature. And they have a parlor upgrade project coming online this year. And those are all focused on farm modernization. And I think that's a really critical difference. Like New York has put a lot of money into dairy, and as they should, they're the 5th largest dairy state in the US. But I think if Vermont wants to keep our dairy farms thriving, organic is certainly a path. But what do we do about those conventional farms that are unable to go organic, that don't have the land base to be able to do that with pasture, are not interested in doing that from whatever reason? Like I think we'll still have a conventional dairy in this state. I hope it's not a handful of large ones. Our numbers, the way they shake out in Vermont, is the majority of our farms are still under 200 milking cows. That's the largest percentage. Our large farms haven't really changed in a number of years. I think it hovers around 39 or 40. And I think those middle farms, or what most of us call MFOs, are at critical risk. So those can be really inefficient from a labor standpoint. You need a lot of people often, you need a lot more equipment. So I see those as a critical risk. I even see some of those, what I would call larger CSFOs, up towards that kind of 200 range. Again, it's more equipment, more people. It's no surprise that we have a huge labor shortage in the state. I think everybody's felt that for a number of years. Milking cows isn't a super glamorous job. Not a lot of people are signing up to get up at 3 in the morning and move cows through the parlor and work a 12-hour shift 7 days a week. So I think that also feeds into why we have aging farmers exiting and nobody wanting to come back to the farm. And it's not particularly appetizing for a young person to come onto a farm that's had 30 years of deferred maintenance, aging infrastructure. And I mean, nobody's signing up to milk in a tie stall barn right now. Like, it's just not something that somebody that's 23 with a college degree is necessarily going to want to come back to. So we've seen a huge push for automated milking systems come back in Vermont over the last couple of years. And I think that's a large part of it, is it's a labor and it's also a lifestyle. So people can have more flexibility over how they divide their work up throughout the day. Maybe you need less people, but that's not always the case. I think sometimes the salespeople for robotic milkers tell you that you can get rid of everybody, but you do still need quite a lot of workforce. I think Nicole could probably talk about that. But so again, there's just a lot of factors that I hear in my role as UVM Extension, which has been funded through DBIC. I'm really grateful that DBIC chose to fund the technical assistance piece. So it started out that I was 100% funded through DBIC, and I only focused on dairy cows. And as funding has changed and there's been a little bit more uncertainty around funding and priorities have shifted, I've moved a little bit into goats as well. And, there's no difference in a fluid goat milk model and a fluid cow milk model. They share the exact same, they're paid slightly differently, but they're going through the exact same issues that cow dairies are going through, which has been pretty interesting to kind of watch those two parallels. So, my role with UVM Extension is really to just provide unbiased technical assistance to dairy farms in Vermont, regardless of size, regardless of management style. And I really like to focus on, doing some applied research that I can then bring back out to farms that is meaningful. So I think it's a critical role to have within the state to be able to have that. And, hopefully those appropriations remain for the dairy business initiatives in the next appropriations round. But yeah, I think, I'm happy to open it up now for questions or comments about the Vermont dairy industry in general, maybe what we can do to collectively keep it thriving.
Open up to questions. Anyone like to offer some thoughts or questions? But if we have to, priorities, you can't have a million priorities. You gotta have 2 or 3. What would you recommend that we do? A couple of things immediately that we should be focused on,
Funding wise,
or anything
Anything?
to support dairy farmers.
I mean, we desperately need infrastructure. And that's anything from bulk tanks to upgrading parlors to actually upgrading the barns, which I know that DBIC can't cover that, but I think Maine did a infrastructure round of funding. I think New York State has done something similar in the past. And I think kind of looking at what some neighboring states have done to sort of help prop up their dairy industries. I mean, Maine is at just over 100 farms. Like, they've dwindled significantly. But they have an over order on their milk and had this one-time round of funding for construction projects specifically. So I think focusing on that would go a long way with dairy farms.
Go to the phone, Kirsten or Harold.
Yes, yeah, good comments, Whitney. I agree with most of it. Answering to your question on what we should be looking to invest in, as I think I mentioned a couple times to this group, is technology on the farm. There's been tremendous strides on tools that are available to us as dairy farmers. We don't always have the free cash to take advantage of them, but they do make us more efficient. They help us maintain our cow herd longer, and there's just a lot of new tools out there, and also on the crop side, precision agriculture. When we talk about input costs and diesel fuel, those are tools that are very helpful. On the declining dairy, I think if you looked at the demographics across the country, they might vary a few percentage points from state to state, region to region, and in Canada, they're all pretty similar, and for a lot of the same reasons. I guess one point I'd like to make objectively is, I think a lot of you people probably play in the stock market, and you probably sell your stocks when they're high and they're not when they're low by choice. And when we think about real estate and the value of cows and equipment and the age of the farmer, sometimes it's just a fiscal responsible thing to do is to, if you're 65 or 70 years old and milking cows for 50 years, to sell your things and retire and have a little money left over. It doesn't always mean that they're on their last leg and don't have a dime left. Sometimes it's the thing to do. And that is never, ever put out in any press release. But the other part is the state of Vermont, and Anson knows this because he lives it. The regulations are very tight on what we do on our farms, and that has it has a cost, and we all live it, organic and conventional. But it is the cost of production for everybody. And I don't know what we can do about it. Probably not too much, but it is a factor in the dairy industry. When we think about our neighboring states around the Northeast, we've talked about New York. You haven't said, but it's a 20% tax credit on investments. Connecticut just started the same program, virtually copying that the first of the year. We've talked about Maine. Connecticut has a quarterly payment based on production, and Massachusetts has a program. I'm not sure how it is designed. So it's something we should think about as a state and a group. While we have 430 farms functioning, it's nice to has some startup farms. It's nice that young people can have the opportunity to find a milk market, but I think all of us know it take less money to keep an existing farm going than it would to start up a new one. So I think those are some of the things I think about as we sit here listening to this discussion. Thank you.
Harold. Jeremy?
Yeah, thanks, Anson. I agree mostly with Harold is saying. Certainly, we don't have to look too far, and Whitney mentioned it too. Both Maine, Math, and Massachusetts do an overorder price. I don't see why Vermont can't do something similar. Carve away some budget for that. I know it's hard to find money, but they support their farms in ways that I think Vermont should be able to do.
Alan?
Just a couple of clarifications. MFO, CMFO, what do they mean? And when you discussed, goat dairy being in the same boat, is your comment, it's like, well, the drought is the drought and inputs are imports, inputs in labor and these other elements? Or are you seeing a market demand also maybe soften a little bit for goat, where all of a sudden it looked like maybe some speculative opportunity, the meat hasn't really taken off, but people are finding different ways to create goat dairy products, be it soap or be it probably a kefir that I'm not aware of, but.
So I'll answer the MFO question first. So those are the RAP sizes, or the regulated agricultural practices that the state water quality uses to define farm size. So SF farm. Yeah, so MFO means a medium farm operation. LFO is large farm, which is over, is it 700 milking animals? 699. Yeah, so MFO goes from 200 to 699. LFO goes from 700, on up. And there's a distinction in small farms. So SFO is under 50 milking animals, and CSFO, or a certified small farm operation, is 51 to 199.
Got it. Okay.
So that's just how the state categorizes them for
Nice.
water quality regulations. And the goat milk quality, so Vermont is really unique in that we have Vermont Creamery. And so they buy fluid milk from about 12 goat dairies in Vermont and 3 in Canada, and they process that. So it's really similar to like a Cabot, or so milk goes there, it's then made into a value-added product, which is distributed nationwide. Vermont Creamery has seen a drastic increase in demand for their product. So they're looking for more goat milk. So in response, they've been looking for it from Vermont dairy specifically, because logistically it's much easier to get it from Vermont than it is to get it from Quebec or Ontario. So those goat dairies are encountering the same issues, right? Even though they're small animals and you can more easily milk them, and to a certain extent, your startup costs could potentially be lower. You can get into it with fewer animals. They're dealing with the same exact issues as cow dairy. So they need to increase in size to be able to be profitable is the big one. So you can't milk 50 goats and ship to Vermont Creamery and necessarily make that pencil. They need to be milking.
Too, per hundredweight is pretty high. That makes a difference for goat milk.
Fewer trucks.
Fewer trucks.
And the volume of goat milk is significantly less than cows.
Got it. Thank you.
John Franklin?
One thing I've thought of for years was, how would it be possible for us to pull some tourist dollars into agriculture? We've had every picture of Vermont you ever see is some sort of agriculture in it, and that's what they sell for people to come here. And would it be worth a rooms and meals tax or something like that we could kick back to agriculture in the state? The agricultural contribution in the state is equivalent to the state budget. And we're struggling and going away. Um, it's something that should be brought up in the State House, I would believe.
Thank you, John. I know it's been discussed in the past, and I think there has been bills that have been introduced but have not been successful over the years. Back to Kirsten or Harold.
Yeah, Sans, I just had another comment. You know, as we sit here, when we talk about infrastructure and processing, you know, we are losing 3 dairy processing plants this year with Hoods. We've talked about in Barry, the Enosburg cheese plant is gonna, I guess, stay open at some form, but it's gonna be drastically reduced. And Farrago in Georgia will be, you know, closing the doors either this year or next year. So I think, you know, that's kind of alarming to me as a milk producer, and when we have less places to process milk. So not a good sign.
Yeah, we got a group that's trying to work on the Franklin cheese situation, and we've got some hope there, but it certainly will not be at the capacity that it currently is. It's a transition to a new model there. I think Catherine.
I don't want to cut. Jeremy was before me.
Okay, go ahead, Jeremy.
Oh, thanks, Catherine. Just on that processing part. So I didn't prepare any slides. I'm just here as a public commenter, but certainly Stonyfield's invested 50 million in their plant in New Hampshire is in this milk shed. I think that's important for the state to know that we have a processing capacity. We're investing here. It's not in New York State, it's in New Hampshire. We're, you know, Stonyfield's expanding our supply. The organic market is hot right now. We're taking advantage of that. I've seen that map that Catherine showed, the IDFA map doesn't include New Hampshire. It may be a little bit after those investments were started. So it's not all doom and gloom in New England. You know, we're supporting 9 routes in the state of Vermont, 2 in Maine. We're expanding into New York State. I think it's important for the folks in Montpelier to hear that Stonyfield is a good option organically right now. We're transitioning, I think, 20 farms. I have in my region, I'm covering 3 first-generation dairy farmers. Not something we're seeing a lot of, but certainly some opportunity there. And kind of echo Whitney's point, transitioning to organic is not for everybody. It's a slog. It's a tough year if you're only doing 1 year for cows, 3 years for your land. So, but certainly some opportunity in organic market. Happy to talk more about that. But thanks for meeting and all good stuff, and just keep the discussion going.
Thank you, Jeremy. Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to really say that I appreciate this conversation quite a bit. And I think as I'm summarizing it in my own head, it's all in the vein of making Vermont an attractive place for the dairy industry to do business, both at the farm side as well as the farm side and the processing side. And I think, as Laura said, we need both to be thriving, to be successful here. And what I really liked is some of the conversation about some of the different state programs. And, you know, I know it is very difficult in Vermont, and historically some of our conversations have, you know, been around limitations of what we can do to support our farms and processors. But as we look around in some of the examples that Harold and others mentioned of other states, there's some really good lessons I think this group could learn from what some other states are doing. Harold, I think you mentioned the 20% investment tax credit in New York. That was issued in Connecticut as well. And so, you know, that's a really great. I just want to share my support for that program for our farms to incentivize them to do some of the things, Whitney, you were talking about, and just, continued investment on farms. So I think that's a really great one. The other area I think was mentioned in Maine, kind of with the overorder premium programs with Maine. Massachusetts has a tax credit program. I did also want this group to be aware that Connecticut is making some great progress with replicating the Massachusetts program in their state. That replication is going to require significant more dollars in the state to make it as impactful for the farms there, just because production is much higher than it is in Massachusetts. But there are efforts around, I guess my summary is there are efforts around our states to do exactly what we want to do, right? Make sure that this is a good place to do business. And I'd love to see this group and this commission really come together and, continue this brainstorming and really putting some ideas down on paper and bit of a list of what we think could be helpful. So thank you. And again, appreciate the conversation. I think we're heading in the right direction.
I just throwing back a question to you, Catherine and Kirsten, that you represent processors with dairy farms in New York and Vermont. So do you see, is that tax credit, are you starting to notice it with the infrastructure on New York dairies that you're not seeing on the Vermont side?
What I would say on that is great support in both with our farmers in Connecticut and New York on that. And, as New York needed to extend that tax credit, I think it expired this year or the next year. Anyways, we're waiting to see if that would be expanded. There's a lot of angst and excitement because people are thinking about what is that next project on farm? What does that next piece of equipment need? And so I think what that signals to me is that it is part of their business planning now, and they are thinking ahead to what is the next investment they need to make. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I would echo that. In New York, it's been a huge catalyst for investment, and it's been game changing for a lot of farms in New York State. As far as doing it here in Vermont, like Anson said, we've looked at different models and different ways, and I think John Franklin, you suggested the rooms and meals tax. These are conversations that have been had but have never left the barn, so to speak. So always ready to hear more ideas that could certainly support an effort like that.
Well, thank you, Whitney. Thank you for all your work you're doing, and you're talking about a lot of farmers, and sometimes it's pretty raw. So we were all, I think, in that space of struggling what we can do to help all that we can. And we think about it a lot, but I think we've got some lists today that I've heard of that may need to accelerate. So I appreciate it. And I think we're on to our next, I don't know, Harold, do you have a comment? Got one more?
Yeah, one more. I don't want to pile it on, but on the New York tax credit, it's pretty unique in that a lot of tax credits, if you can't use them, they're rolled ahead to the next year, they go away. And this one here is a cash back. If you can't use it all on your tax form, they write you a check back for whatever that amount is. So it's a pretty robust plan. And just before we finish, I wanted to go back to Catherine's presentation. And she talked a lot about exports, and there was a couple of questions about, the ups and downs of that market, especially with the current, war in Iran. I just would offer that we're 16 or 17% of our production goes out of this country, every day, every year. So we're way beyond on whether we participate or not. And it does have its ups and downs. And the other point I want to make that maybe everyone doesn't know is that our promotion dollars fund and run U.S. Dairy Export Council. So those are some of your 10 and 15 cents at work for us every day. Just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
we were honored to have the leader of the Export Council with us in New York, and I think if I got this right, she said Europe is number one, New Zealand number two, and the United States is number three, and she doesn't like to be number three.
Oh,
I think that was the quote, and so they're working hard on the behalf of the dairy farmers for those dollars, but it's a dynamic market, and there's so much going on in the world, but my guess is that focus is not being number three, it's going to be number one, so.
she has done an incredible job for us, and so it's been fun to be part of.
That's Krista Harden, if people want to.
Yes.
Krista Harden.
Yes.
It's, we're just delighted to have her with us in Albany to talk to a lot of us and a lot of young farmers as well. So I think we want to move on to milk in the schools. Is that okay? All right, so we have a quick update. Just a little background. I think you probably all are aware of whole milk in schools has the potential to come back after a long time. And Senator Welch teamed up with the senator from Kansas and essentially led the charge on the Senate side. And it took more than a decade, I think, to change this, but we still have some work to do. And I think Laura's going to lead the discussion here. We have some folks with the education department and that's where the lunch program lands. It's in the education department, but Laura, go ahead.
So Rosie Kruger, who's the state director of child nutrition programs at the Agency of Education, was not able to be here, and the two staff people she would normally send also were otherwise occupied today. So she did send this review. I sent it to you all this morning, and it will be posted as part of the document. So I just pulled it up on the screen in case you all had a chance to read through it earlier today. Or if there's any questions. I did tell Rosie that if you had questions, I would send them back to her, and she said she'd be happy to provide any answers. So if you had a chance to read through it, knowing that I just sent it out this morning.
Yeah, if anyone has any dealing with the school lunch programs, they're very complicated. There's certain things that they have to do. They're very complicated, and the food service directors, do everything they can to try to make this work. But there's some work that still needs to be done on this to get the option of whole milk being back in our schools. So.
What was the narrative for not including it in the other? It's just
I
like
don't know.
staggering how we're gonna do it just for lunch, but none of the other programs, given that it's pretty well known that
Probably trying to get it passed, I guess.
maybe,
Well,
but
that, and the whole program is based on like calories, not carbohydrates, not when the school lunch thing is all about calories. So they try to pull out milk wherever but you can have juice that's like not as many calories, but 50 grams of sugar.
so they reached their calorie maybe
Yeah.
limit, and then they were like, let's forget about the other programs that we all know are in schools.
Right.
It could be, I'm speculating here, which is easy to do, is that school lunch programs are more universally accepted as part of perhaps the political landscape. And that when we talk about, oh, now we're expanding it to breakfast, it could be, as you say, Secretary, that this is the first step. We're going to focus on what's more accepted, being the lunch process.
Okay. Any follow up on that? I think, or are we all good?
There was just, I would say, if you haven't had a chance to read through on pages 2 and 3, Rosie did provide some of the feedback that they've received to date about having options, confusion around the options, increased waste, difficulties with having to manage now 3 types of milk for the multiple programs that a school may offer. Vendors may be no longer interested in providing the school-sized 1% or fat-free milk. I think this comes at an interesting time as well, based on Catherine's information around butterfat and thinking about how maybe there's more appetite to get rid of whole milk instead of skimming it because there is too much butter fat. So how that's working together on the processor front, I think is of interest. And then the summer food service program has always allowed for whole milk. And so I think there's some interesting dynamics regarding the multiple programs that schools work under that Rosie did put some information in. And then she ended with the sugar limits for yogurt and flavored milk, which is part of the project that I was mentioning around the milk in cans, burn milk or burn dairy, doing flavored school milk that meets the sugar requirement because the sugar requirement has become more restrictive. So there's some work afoot in this region on providing flavored milk that meets the new sugar, as well as yogurt. So if anybody has any questions either now or after, please send them to me and I will send them to Rosie to get answered for you.
Good. So I think we're part of the agenda where we have public comment. Anyone would like to comment publicly? We've had some of that already, but that's if there's any other comments we'd like to have. Hearing none, I would maybe just some follow-ups from what I've heard today. I think we need to pick up our cadence here on meeting from this group. And I think I would love to learn more about tax credits and how that works. And I think maybe if we could set one meeting and we'll just focus on tax credit. I mean, what are they doing in New York? What are they doing in Connecticut? What are they doing in neighboring states? Because if we are going to have to go to the legislature, we're going to have to start work on that pretty much immediately for next session. Because it takes through the process. If there's something that we wanted to propose or think about. So that would be my suggestion as an immediate follow-up. If we could have and I could work with Laura and Whitney and so forth on maybe putting that program together, and maybe we can meet in another month or so. That seems doable. Or maybe it's 6 weeks or when we know we've got something that we really want to present and we've got some knowledge on it. Does that sound doable? John?
Could we add that, looking into an over order too?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we might want to do a deep dive, and maybe we can schedule out over the next 6 months meetings where we're going to get them on the calendar, and then we can have an agenda on that. It might be more, I just sort of process, it might be to take one subject and just do a deep dive and then do the next subject. Maybe the next one is over order and how that works. This commission has looked at that in the past.
Right, I know we've done.
We've looked at it, and it's a really complicated and again, because we're such a big export state, that's where we get into that thorny issue. And some of the other states that have those programs have fewer farmers and production and all that, but it's certainly worth taking a look at. But if that's okay with everyone, maybe we could work on Laura will work on a date. We all can get together and work on maybe this first that I heard consistently was the tax thing. And then there's some other issues that I want to follow up with, Whitney as well, offline. I heard infrastructure as well. So does that seem doable? Okay, good. Okay. Again, thank you for your commitment, your presence. I know it's really rugged out there for many industries, not only dairy right now, but they're all kind of connected, and I appreciate your time and commitment to this. And we've got some work to do, and we just have a lot of work to do. So anyway, with that, I think we're good. Any final comments anyone has?
I just want to say for milk commissioners, you will receive an email follow-up from me for your expense reporting. So please be on the lookout for that. I can send you paper copies or the links to print things off to send back to me. So I didn't have them available because I knew that a lot of people were going to be joining virtually. So please look out for that email from me next week.
Well, thank you all for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Can I,
So I-
do an
So
update of my
I
email
know my
address?
husband is able to do this. I drive to work every day to the farm that needs huge infrastructure.